Imagine the sound of four powerful engines cutting through the skies at 10,000 feet. Beneath this massive, gleaming aircraft lies a world at war, a world teetering on the edge of chaos. This is the B-24 Liberator, a symbol of airborne strength in one of humanity's darkest chapters. A marvel of engineering, a beacon of hope for Allied forces. And yet, a vessel carrying secrets, secrets that would forever be etched in the annals of mystery. Tonight, we revisit a story that has baffled historians, haunted investigators, and kept even the most skeptical among us searching for answers. A story where courage met the unknown and an entire aircraft vanished without a trace. The year was 1943. The world was at war, and in the heat of the conflict, missions like this one were commonplace, yet anything but ordinary. The fate of nations hung in the balance, and every decision carried the weight of life and death. But how does a plane, massive and meticulously maintained, disappear into thin air? No wreckage, no survivors, no clues, just silence. What became of the brave crew aboard this ill-fated flight? What forces could have intervened to erase them so completely? These are the questions that remain unanswered to this day. Tonight, we'll uncover what we know, examine the strange and unsettling details, and explore the many theories that attempt to explain the unexplainable. This is the story of the B-24 that never landed, a haunting flight that defies time, logic, and reason. And as we journey back to 1943, you might find yourself asking, are we even meant to know the truth? The B-24 Liberator. To the Allied forces, it was much more than just a plane. It was a lifeline, a versatile workhorse of the skies, designed for bombing missions that could change the tide of battle. With a wingspan of 110 feet, and a range of over 2,000 miles, it was built to deliver devastation from above. By 1943, this aircraft had become a cornerstone of the Allied air strategy. Missions were planned with precision, executed with determination, and every sortie carried the hope of weakening the enemy's grip. But this story isn't about a typical mission. It isn't about statistics, engineering, or even military strategy. It's about what went wrong. Terribly, inexplicably wrong. In the heart of World War II, when the world seemed consumed by chaos and death, the skies held their own dangers. For every successful flight, there were countless others that ended in disaster. And yet, even among the countless tragedies of war, the story of this B-24 stands apart. This was no ordinary aircraft. This was no ordinary crew. And this was no ordinary disappearance. What began as a mission like any other would soon become an enigma. An event so confounding that even the most experienced investigators of the time could offer little more than speculation. What truly happened on that fateful day in 1943? We begin our journey to find out. In the spring of 1943, the Allied forces leaned heavily on the B-24 Liberator, an aircraft lauded for its range and capacity, yet one that demanded respect for its complexity. The Liberator was a marvel of wartime innovation, a metal leviathan with 4 Pratt & Whitney engines that could carry an extraordinary payload across vast distances. It was both a weapon and a lifeline, a symbol of power soaring against an unforgiving sky. That day, one such aircraft stood poised on an airfield shrouded in morning mist. Its polished aluminum frame gleamed faintly under the dim sunlight as the crew readied themselves for a mission that promised both peril and glory. Inside the Liberator, 10 men worked as a finely tuned machine. Each one had a story, a thread that wove them into the fabric of history. Captain Edward "Eddie" Harrington, the pilot, was known for his sharp instincts and unflappable demeanor. Beside him, Lieutenant Robert "Bob" Gray, the co-pilot, was a young but promising aviator with a quiet determination. In the cramped nose of the aircraft, navigator Jack Pearson studied his charts, his mind already calculating the long journey ahead. In the radio operator's station, Sergeant Charles Whitman tuned his equipment, humming a low tune to steady his nerves. Tail gunner Private Paul Harris, often called the Kid by the crew, had barely turned 20 and wore his youthful optimism like armor. Each man carried not only their assigned roles, but also dreams, fears, and the weight of loved ones left behind. Their camaraderie wasn't born of mere duty. It was forged in the fires of survival, tempered by countless missions where trust in one another was their greatest shield against the unknown. The Liberator itself seemed alive, as though it could sense the gravity of what lay ahead. This aircraft was no stranger to battle. Its fuselage bore the scars of flak and gunfire, its interior haunted by the echoes of past missions. Yet it remained steadfast, a partner to its crew, a metal fortress against the chaos of war. The mission was straightforward on paper, a long-range bombing run targeting a strategic supply depot deep in enemy territory. Intelligence reports suggested a critical supply line that, if disrupted, could cripple enemy logistics for months. The orders were clear, the stakes impossibly high. Their journey would begin from a small airfield in southern England, their flight path taking them over the English Channel, across occupied Europe, and into hostile skies where danger lurked at every turn. It was a mission that required precision, courage, and an unyielding focus. Every detail had been planned with painstaking care, yet the crew knew that once airborne, plans were mere guidelines. The unpredictable nature of war meant they would have to adapt, improvise, and endure whatever the skies had in store. As they gathered for the pre-mission briefing, the room was tense but quiet. Maps were unfurled, flight routes marked, and contingency plans discussed in calm, measured tones. Captain Harrington addressed his crew with the confidence of a leader who had weathered the storm many times before. "Stick to your training. Watch each other's backs. We'll bring this bird home," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the task ahead. Each man left the briefing with a shared sense of purpose. They knew the odds, yet they walked toward their aircraft with heads held high. The roar of the Liberator's engines was deafening, but within the crew compartment, the sound was a familiar rhythm, a prelude to the dance of survival. As the Liberator roared down the runway, the crew braced themselves for the journey ahead. The early morning sky, once serene, had turned ominous. Thick clouds gathered with unsettling speed, and the wind howled like a restless spirit. Rain began to spatter against the aircraft's glass, obscuring the view as they climbed higher, piercing the blanket of gray that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. Inside the cockpit, Captain Harrington gripped the controls tightly, his eyes scanning the instrument panel. "We're climbing through it," he said, more to himself than to his crew. Lieutenant Gray glanced at him but said nothing, his silence a sign of trust. In the cramped nose of the aircraft, Jack Pearson adjusted his maps and instruments, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Visibility's dropping fast," he called out, his voice cutting through the low hum of tension. The weather was more than an inconvenience, it was a test of their resolve. The Liberator shuddered under the strain, its engines fighting against the turbulence. In the tail section, Private Harris tightened his grip on the gun handles, the rattling metal amplifying the sense of unease. The crew exchanged knowing glances. They had faced bad weather before, but something about this storm felt different. Even seasoned veterans like Harrington couldn't shake the feeling that the skies were resisting them, as if nature itself sought to challenge their determination. Despite the conditions, they pressed on. Each man focused on his task, relying on instinct and experience to guide them through the unseen dangers ahead. The Liberator climbed higher, its engines roaring defiantly against the storm, the crew unaware that this mission would take them far beyond anything they had ever faced. The flight had been routine up until that moment, or so it appeared. The B-24 Liberator, designated for a critical mission, was soaring high above the open expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The crew's voices, steady and professional, crackled through the radio waves as they maintained contact with ground control. Routine updates, minor course corrections, and acknowledgments all painted the picture of a crew in command of their situation. But then, just as quickly as the radio chatter had filled the airwaves, it ceased. The static, the hum of the signal, the lifeline between aircraft and ground, all of it vanished in a moment that left silence hanging heavy in the air. Ground control called again. Once. Twice. They adjusted frequencies, thinking perhaps the aircraft had strayed into interference. Nothing. Minutes turned into hours, and with each passing moment, an uneasy tension began to rise. They tried to rationalize it. A damaged transmitter? An electrical failure? But no. Even under those circumstances, a well-trained crew would have found a way to signal, to communicate their plight. The silence was absolute. And yet, the radar told a different story. For a time, the blip of the B-24 remained, steady and unwavering on the screen. Then, without warning, it flickered. Once, twice, and then it was gone, extinguished as though the aircraft had been plucked from the sky. In the control room, the tension broke into murmurs, then frantic calls to neighboring outposts. But no one had an answer. The Liberator had disappeared, and with it, the fate of its crew. The moment the Liberator's signal was lost, the military launched a search and rescue operation of unprecedented scale. Within hours, aircraft took to the skies, combing the flight's last known coordinates. Naval vessels were dispatched to scour the vast ocean below. Their mission was clear: find the B-24 and bring its crew home. For days, the search continued. Pilots scanned the waters, searching for the glint of wreckage or the faint shimmer of an oil slick. Rescue teams braved turbulent seas, straining their eyes for anything: a raft, a flare, even a life jacket. But no trace of the Liberator was ever found. Reports from those involved in the search painted a picture of confusion and frustration. One pilot described it as chasing a ghost. Another said, "We covered every inch of that flight path, but there was nothing. Not a single shred of evidence." By the end of the first week, the operation was scaled back. Official reports chalked it up to an unfortunate loss, another casualty of war. But privately, the men and women who had been part of the search admitted their unease. Planes don't just vanish. Crews don't simply disappear without a trace. The Pacific had swallowed the Liberator whole, and with it, any hope of an explanation. And yet, even as the official narrative began to settle into place, whispers of something extraordinary began to emerge. Civilians in nearby villages spoke of strange events on the night of the Liberator's disappearance. One fisherman claimed he had seen an aircraft in the distance, flying low over the water. But as he strained his eyes to follow its path, he noticed something unusual: a faint glow, almost like a halo, surrounding the plane. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into the clouds. Another account came from a military radar operator stationed hundreds of miles away. He reported seeing an unidentified signal on his screen at the same time the B-24 went missing. It lingered for a few moments, then darted erratically before disappearing altogether. Officially, the anomaly was dismissed as a technical glitch, but those who worked with him described his demeanor in the days that followed. He was shaken, muttering under his breath about how the signal moved in ways no plane should. Even years later, more stories trickled in. A retired sailor who had served on one of the search vessels spoke of seeing lights in the sky during the operation, lights that weren't flares or aircraft, but something entirely different. He had never dared to share his account officially, fearing ridicule. But his eyes told a different story, one of a man haunted by what he had seen. These accounts, scattered and unverified, added a layer of mystery to the already baffling disappearance. They didn't provide answers, but they did suggest one thing: whatever happened to the Liberator that night, it was far from ordinary. In the years following the disappearance of the B-24 Liberator, whispers began to circulate among those stationed near the presumed flight path. At first, the stories seemed innocuous, just campfire tales told by soldiers trying to make sense of an impossible event. But as time went on, the accounts became harder to dismiss. Local villagers in the remote regions near the last known coordinates reported something unsettling. They described the faint sound of engines roaring in the dead of night, an aircraft circling overhead, never coming closer, never fading away. Some claimed they had seen it with their own eyes, a shadow, impossibly large, gliding silently across the sky. Not a bird, not another plane, but something else entirely. They swore it resembled the outline of a B-24, its ghostly form partially illuminated by the moonlight. Yet when they looked again, it was gone, as if swallowed whole by the clouds. The stories didn't stop there. Soldiers reported hearing strange noises while patrolling the base, footsteps that echoed down empty corridors, muffled voices in the distance, and doors creaking open with no one there. Some claimed to see faint figures, men in uniform standing silently, only to vanish as they approached. A mechanic swore he saw the silhouette of a Liberator in the fog one night. He ran toward it, shouting, but when he got closer, the aircraft simply dissolved into the mist. The base chaplain even spoke of receiving confessions from men who were terrified to admit what they had witnessed. They felt they were being followed, haunted by something they could not explain. It was as though the crew of the lost B-24 had returned, unable to rest, their presence lingering in the shadowy corners of the base and beyond. The most logical explanation for the disappearance of the B-24 was mechanical failure. Even the most advanced aircraft of the time were prone to malfunctions. The Liberator, while reliable, had a complex system of engines that required meticulous maintenance. A single oversight, a loose bolt, a crack in the fuel line, could spell disaster. There were also reports of B-24s experiencing sudden fuel loss mid-flight. Could this have been the fate of our doomed crew? Some mechanics pointed to the high-altitude performance of the Liberator, where the freezing temperatures could cause instruments to fail or engines to seize up without warning. Pilots were trained to handle such emergencies, but what if the conditions that day were so severe that no amount of skill could save them? Another theory pointed to enemy fire. The B-24 had a reputation for being a heavy bomber that could endure a beating, but it was not invincible. The skies in 1943 were filled with danger. Enemy fighters patrolled the air, and anti-aircraft guns lay hidden on the ground, ready to fire at anything that crossed their path. Records from the opposing forces in the region revealed an uptick in aerial confrontations during the Liberator's mission window. Could the B-24 have been caught in an ambush, its crew unable to send a distress call before being struck down? And yet, this theory left one glaring question unanswered. If the plane had been shot down, where was the wreckage? Why hadn't a single piece of debris been found? The B-24 was equipped with the best navigation tools of its time, but even the most advanced equipment wasn't immune to human error. A slight miscalculation could set the plane off course, sending it miles away from its intended route. There were also stories of magnetic anomalies in the region, unexplained distortions that could disrupt compasses and radios, leaving pilots disoriented in an endless expanse of sky. Could the crew have wandered into an uncharted territory, far from rescue? Did they unknowingly fly into a storm that obscured their vision, sending them hurtling into the unforgiving terrain below? These questions lingered, but like the others, they only scratched the surface of the mystery. But not everyone believed the explanation lay in the realm of science. For decades, there have been whispers of something unexplainable about this flight. Some have pointed to ancient curses tied to the lands over which the Liberator flew. Others have suggested time slips, a momentary rupture in the fabric of reality that trapped the plane and its crew in another dimension. There were even accounts of strange lights reported in the skies that same night. Pilots from nearby bases described seeing orbs of light that moved with an intelligence, darting in ways no human-made aircraft could. Some claimed these lights were responsible for the plane's disappearance, taking it to a place beyond our understanding. Years after the disappearance, a set of declassified military documents surfaced, adding fuel to the fire. One report described an unconfirmed sighting of a downed B-24 deep in a remote jungle, but when a team was dispatched to investigate, they found nothing. Another file detailed strange metallic fragments recovered from a region near the Liberator's last known coordinates. These fragments didn't match any known aircraft materials of the time. There was also the testimony of a lone pilot who swore he saw the B-24 flying alongside him weeks after it was declared missing. He described the aircraft as eerily quiet, its windows darkened, and its crew completely still. When he tried to make radio contact, there was no response. Moments later, the plane vanished before his eyes. Despite these accounts, no definitive evidence ever came to light. Every discovery led to more questions than answers, and the true fate of the B-24 remains shrouded in mystery to this day. For the families of the crew members, the pain never truly ended. The shock of the plane's disappearance wasn't just in the silence that followed the last radio transmission. It was in the endless waiting, the unanswered questions, and the gnawing feeling that their loved ones were lost somewhere between life and death. They held on to hope for as long as they could, hoping that maybe, just maybe, their husbands, fathers, brothers, or sons would return. But the weeks stretched into months, and those months turned into years. The military gave them nothing. No wreckage was found, no evidence of a crash, and no bodies, just empty silence. For some families, the search for closure became a lifelong pursuit. The grief became a permanent fixture in their lives, a constant companion. These were not just military men, they were fathers, sons, and husbands. The loss weighed heavy, not just in the days immediately following the flight's disappearance, but for decades after. What had truly happened to the B-24 crew? The families needed to know. The military reports, often cryptic and disjointed, seemed to offer more questions than answers. Official statements spoke of a plane that simply disappeared, as if it had vanished into thin air. The crew had been in contact, and then, without a sound, they were gone. No distress signals, no wreckage. The reports, to this day, remain fragmented and incomplete. Some would argue that these documents were never meant for public eyes. After all, the disappearance of a bomber during wartime might raise uncomfortable questions. How could an entire aircraft, with a well-trained crew, simply vanish without a trace? Was there a failure within the military? A flaw in the systems that were meant to protect them? Or was there something else at play, something beyond explanation? As time went on, these questions grew louder, but answers were never forthcoming. The military did not provide a satisfying explanation, and as the decades passed, the case became less about the plane itself and more about what the military might have been hiding. But as the years went by and the official answers remained elusive, the story of the B-24 grew larger. It was no longer just a military mystery, it became a piece of folklore, a ghost story whispered in the halls of airbases and later in books and documentaries. People began to speak of the plane as something more than just an aircraft. It was an enigma, an embodiment of all the uncertainties and fear of wartime. In the years following the disappearance, writers and filmmakers turned to the story, creating their own theories about what happened to the ill-fated B-24. Some portrayed it as a simple crash, others as a brush with something supernatural, and still others suggested that the crew had fallen victim to an unexplainable event. Over time, these fictional accounts blended with the real-life facts, and the line between truth and myth grew increasingly blurred. The disappearance became not just a mystery, but a legend, a story that inspired countless narratives, each one adding a new layer of intrigue. The B-24 became a symbol, a warning of the unknown, a testament to the fragility of life, and a reminder that sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that don't have answers. The clock ticks, the air thick with unanswered questions. There are moments in history that challenge our understanding of reality, where every explanation feels incomplete and no answer seems enough. This is one of those moments. The disappearance of the B-24 Liberator wasn't just another wartime tragedy. It was something that lingered in the minds of those who dared to search for answers. It wasn't a straightforward tale of mechanical failure, enemy fire, or a simple navigational mistake. What happened to that crew on that fateful day remains a mystery that haunts those who were left behind and those who search in vain for truth. Why didn't they find the wreckage? Why didn't the search teams uncover even a shred of evidence? What happened to the plane that made it disappear, not just from the radar, but from the very fabric of reality itself? The search didn't just reveal an empty sky. It opened the door to more questions. Was it really an accident, or was there something more to it? What could possibly explain the disappearance of an entire plane, never to be found, and the eerie tales that followed? Those who were left to pick up the pieces were left with nothing but fragments of rumors, whispers, and unsettling eyewitness accounts. Some saw strange lights in the sky, others claimed to hear the sound of engines far off, but no plane was ever found. The silence that followed the disappearance became more deafening as time passed. Could it be that the plane never truly vanished, that it was simply lost in a space beyond our grasp? Was there a hidden hand at play, an unknown force, a tragedy that went far beyond the realm of human explanation? Was it the consequences of war, a plane lost to time and error? Or, as some whispered, was there something else entirely, an event that defies logic, evading any possible rational answer? As we look back on this story, we are left with one overwhelming question. Is this simply a case of human error, or is there something far beyond our understanding at work? Perhaps we'll never know. The answers remain elusive, as fleeting as the plane itself. But the mystery lingers, forever entangled with the airwaves and the stories told around campfires, in dark corners, and through the cold silence of the night. It is a reminder that sometimes, no matter how hard we search or how much we want to understand, there are things we can't explain, things that slip through our fingers like sand, vanishing before we can even grasp them. As the story draws to a close, I leave it in your hands. What do you believe happened to the B-24 Liberator? Was it simply an unfortunate accident, or was it something else entirely? This mystery has lingered for decades, but it remains unresolved. A question hanging in the air, like the faintest whisper. I invite you to share your thoughts, your theories, and your own stories in the comments below. Have you heard of similar events? Or perhaps you've experienced something you can't explain. The more we discuss, the closer we get to understanding the unexplainable. If you've been captivated by this story, if you're ready to uncover more unsolved mysteries, subscribe to the channel. This is just one of many stories we'll explore, one piece of a much larger puzzle. There are countless more hidden behind the veil of history, waiting to be uncovered. Stay with us as we continue to unravel these strange and eerie events, stories that will challenge your perception of the world around you. So until next time, keep your eyes open, stay curious, and remember that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that are waiting to be told. And who knows? Perhaps the answers we seek are closer than we think.